Good morning. Welcome to the virtual breakfast for this week. I'm Christina Corral. I am the cover crop and soil health educator. I'm housed in Lake County, which this town is Baldwin. There's not much in Lake County, but we're there. This morning, we're going to have Dr. Dean Baas, and we're going to show a picture of him in a minute after I get through some housekeeping and my screen goes. Before we get into all the information today, we just have a few housekeeping details that we need you to do. Can you please remember to mute yourself during the presentation? And then you really do need to sign in with your first and last name. Specifically, if you are going to get RUP credits, this is how we know that you are here. And when we are asked by Department of Agriculture to submit that information, we can if we see your name on the list. To do that, you need to click on your participant list, find your name, and hover over your name. And then there's a little place that says rename. Go ahead and click that, and then put your first and your last name so that we know you're here. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat box found at the bottom of the screen, and we will address them either after the presentations are done or after the presenter is talking if we have time. At 7:30 or about at 7:30, we'll give you the RUP and CCA codes so you can submit those to the Department of Agriculture. As always, MSU extensions are open to all. We have to collect the demographic data from our program participants, and it's important and mandated aspect of all Michigan State University Extension programming. This is voluntary, and the information that you provide will not be used in any way to identify you personally, but rather is as a member of a group that participated in this program. A link has been shared in the chat box. We do ask that you take a moment to fill out this information because it's extremely vital for our programming. Thank you for doing that. With that, we're going to start. Our first speaker is Dr. Dean Baas, and he's going to talk about cover crops after wheat.
Okay, thank you, Christina. I'm Dean Baas, and this morning we're going to talk about cover crops after wheat. And I'd like to spend a little bit of time talking about mixtures. You hear a lot about mixtures, and we're going to at least touch on mixtures and why you might want to consider using them. But to begin with, why cover crops after wheat? Really, that period after wheat is one of the best windows that we have for cover crops. It's the largest window that we have with decent growing conditions for a long period of time. And it really gives you an opportunity to maximize the benefits of the cover crops. Because of that large window, there's many species options, and that gives you a chance to achieve more goals with your cover crops and actually more ways to achieve those goals. To give you an idea about that window, when you're looking at selecting a cover crop after wheat, we really recommend you take a look at the Midwest Cover Crop Council's Cover Crop Decision Tool. This was developed with a team from Michigan. It's available on the website at www.mccc.msu.edu. And what I've put up here is a screenshot of the cover crops for Michigan in the tool. The seeding dates that you see in the chart on the right, those are the all-county averages, but you can put in your specific county to refer or to refine those seeding periods. You also have an opportunity to start playing around with what goals you're trying to achieve. You can select the goals, and the tool will help you select help you find what cover crops will do a better job of meeting those goals. This is the period we're talking about here, roughly beginning of July through about mid-September is a period for seeding cover crops after wheat. And notice that all of the cover crops have the green bar, which is reliable establishment within that box. The other thing to notice, though, is notice how these bars are kind of staggered. They don't all completely fill the box, and we'll talk about that a little bit when we get to establishment. So keep that in mind. But whether you're picking a single cover crop or whether you're considering a mix, you can see we have tremendous amount of options in Michigan in that window. So what are farmers saying about mixtures? This is from the CTIC SARE 2019 and 2020 cover crop survey report. This is a nationwide report. And they surveyed, in this part of the survey, they got almost 900 farmers. that responded. And you can see if you total everything up, you've got about 76% of the farmers surveyed either planted a mix in 2019 or intended to plant a mix in 2020. So there's really a high percentage of farmers out there that are using mixes. And this really comes from a lot of the articles that have been put out there by mixes, seed companies pushing mixes. So it's really something that you can take a look at in your system. So why consider a cover crop mixture versus a single species? Well, there's more ecosystem services from multiple species. You can really increase your rotational diversity. This is an opportunity to get not only more plants in your rotation, but also different types of plants. But when you're considering this, then the next question that comes along is how many species should be chosen. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that later. At least one of the species in the mixture should establish based on field and growing season conditions. Because of this, it may produce more stable performance year to year, but also individual species establishment and performance will vary year to year. And that all comes from the different types of species, where they're best suited within the growing season and how they're best suited compared to climate conditions. We'll talk a little bit more about that as well. And also keep in mind that NRCS may require a mix for cost share. Why would you consider a single species versus a cover crop mixture? Well, it's simpler and it's more predictable. When you're only dealing with one species, you have a better idea about how it grows, when it grows. It's easier to manage when you're looking at seeding. The seeding window is easier to determine on a single mixture. And also termination. When you're terminating a single cover crop, you can look at the options, particularly with herbicides that are related to terminating that single species. When you have multiple species, you may have to use multiple herbicides to get the termination to work properly for you. Usually a single species produces as much biomass. Mixes do not outperform for many of the cover crop goals, and we will take a look at some research that was done on that. And then single species are cheaper than a mix. To have more species that give you more opportunity to have cover crops that are successful depending on your conditions, that's really like buying an insurance policy. And as we all know, you have to pay for insurance. So I've seen cover crop mixtures that can be upwards to $50, $60 an acre because of the complexity of the mix and the number of species in them, where many of the single species you can get down, usually in the cheaper cases down in the less than $20 an acre range. So we're just going to consider a few of these today because we don't have a lot of time. Or we're going to talk about biomass production. We're going to talk about variability and establishment and how many species you should consider. So biomass production, there was a research review paper that was published in 2020 by Florence and McGuire, and they reviewed 27 published papers where cover crop mixtures of 3 or more species were compared with all of those same species planted as monocultures. And in 88% of the studies, the biomass of the monoculture was equal to the biomass of the mixture. In 10% of the studies, the biomass of the monoculture was greater than the mixture. And in only 2% of the studies was the biomass of the mixture greater than the monoculture. A summary of this paper, there was little evidence of mixtures outperforming monocultures with regard to all of the properties that you see listed here. So the bottom line is, when you're looking at a single species versus a mixture, the single species can perform just as well particularly if you have a single goal that you're looking at achieving in your field. You may want to consider a single species, even for multiple goals. So keep that in mind, that mixtures don't necessarily perform better when it comes to biomass and a lot of the characteristics like weed suppression and nutrient retention. Let's talk a little bit about variable establishment. When it comes to establishing cover crops, whether it's a mixture or single species, really the two things that impact germination are temperature and moisture. During this period of the year, temperature is not an issue, but moisture is definitely the biggest driver. And we're going to take a look at the impact of that. But also consider that plant type, whether it's a summer annual, cool season annual, winter annual, really can potentially affect establishment. And I want to refer back to when I talked about how those bars were staggered within that planting window. That tells you that when you're trying to plant multiple species, you are probably going to be planting some of those species when it's not really ideal for them to be planted. So that can definitely impact germination and performance. The other things that affect establishment are planting conditions, things like seed size. Different seed sizes really need to be planted at different depths. So again, when you're planting a mix, you're probably compromising on planting depth for some of the species in the mix, that you're not getting them at their ideal depth for performing well as they would in a single species. So you are making some compromises with the mixture, and those can affect establishment. I found this study that was done actually in France, but I thought this was pretty interesting. They evaluated 36 different cover crops for germination, temperature, and moisture. If you take a look at this chart, they did it based on water potential, which I have converted here to percent of field capacity just to give you a better feel for this data. And so we have that here on the y-axis with the cover crops on the x-axis, and the different shades of the bars are different families. And one of the things they found in this study was that seed density had an impact on germination moisture. But if you take a look at this closely, you can see that here up front we have the cover crops that require the least amount of germination moisture are a lot of the grasses. That's where we have cereal rye, we have oats, annual ryegrasses, things like that. And over here, requiring more germination moisture are a lot of particularly the legumes. And that's why, this is one reason why we see variability in the establishment of cover crop mixes, is probably due to the fact that moisture content is sufficient for some of the species, but not necessarily sufficient for other species. So that can delay the germination. And also, whatever gets out of the ground first is probably going to have a competitive edge and may outcompete the things that come out of the ground later. This is one of the reasons why when you have legumes in a mix along with grasses, we really recommend that you cut down on the amount of grasses, because as this chart shows, they are going to germinate with the least amount of moisture, will probably get out of the ground quicker, and can dominate your mix. So keep these types of things in mind when you're selecting your mixture. Take a look at your seed size, consider germination, moisture, and other factors that could affect your establishment. So how many species should you be looking at in a cover crop mix? There's cover crop mixtures out there. Some people call them cover crop cocktails that go as high as 12, 15 species. There may be some that are even more. We recommend one from each functional group. Grasses, legumes, and brassicas is probably sufficient. If more are desired, you can add different types within the functional group, such as grasses that are a summer annual as well as a winter annual, and that will broaden not only the growing season of your mixture, but will broaden the climate conditions under which they will grow. What it really comes down to is how much assurance do you want? How much can you pay? Those cover crop mixes can be quite expensive, so cost is really a consideration. Let's see what farmers are saying about species in their mixes. This is from that same study. And in that top chart, you can see that 70% of the farmers in the study, and this one had close to 700 farmers that answered this part of the survey, use 5 or less cover crops species in their mixes, and about 30% use more than that. And if you look at trends over time, 48% of the farmers have actually increased the number of species over time. About 40% have their mixes have remained the same, and only about 8% have decreased the amount of cover crops they're using. So if you're still not quite sure what to do as far as selecting a cover crop after wheat, MSU has a publication shown to the right here. It was developed in conjunction with Midwest Cover Crops Council. It's available at the link listed. It's a recipe. It tells you exactly what to do and what you can expect for using an oats and radish mix as a cover crop after wheat, going to corn and soybeans. Take a look at that. We have other resources. We recommend taking a look at the MSU Cover Crop website, covercrops.msu.edu, the Midwest Cover Crop Council website, and decision tools at mccc.msu.edu. And if you go to the MSU Cover Crop site, you can find the list of the MSU Cover Crop team, and we are all here to help you. So in summary, for cover crop mixtures, it really depends on your goals, whether you want to use a mixture and how many species you're going to want to use. Be prepared for more management. You have more considerations when it comes to planting and termination. Mixtures in general do not produce more biomass. You can expect variability in establishment and performance, and those are going to come based on growing conditions that year. So year to year, it's not necessarily going to look the same. Expect to pay more for mixtures, and the MSU Cover Crop team and resources are available to assist you. So with that, I will give it back to Christina.
We have a couple of questions. I do need to clarify. I think I said Samantha's name wrong. I think I introduced her as Sarah Daniel. It's not. It's Samantha Daniel. I don't know why I did that. I'm sorry, Samantha. The first question we have is for you, Dean. And the question is, can you explain the ecosystem services and what they actually mean? We use that term a lot, but we don't explain it.
Okay. Well, sorry I didn't explain that term. Basically, ecosystem services are anything that the cover crop can provide to support our cropping systems. Typically, you think of them as goals. The goals in the ecosystem services are very similar. It's things like compaction fighting, weed suppression, nitrogen sourcing, nitrogen scavenging, soil health, building soil health. Really all those types of goals are really what we call ecosystem services. I would say it's just kind of more of a fancy term for cover crop goals.
Thanks. And there is a question for Roy, and he's interested, Dean, in what's growing behind you. What's cover crop do you have in your corn?
Okay, the picture behind me came from our interseeding cover crops and corn study, which we did around V3, V5. And behind me is what we call the winter kill mix, which is oats, Austrian winter pea, and crimson clover is in that mix. In that same study, we also had a winter hardy mix, which was annual ryegrass, dwarf Essex rape, and I forget the third one. Sorry, but that one behind me is oats and radish and crimson clover.
And right along, you can keep on talking, Dean, because Tony has a question about some of the mixes, and he's seen the outcome of cover crop radishes for sugar beets after wheat, but has there been any study for the outcome for corn, dry beans, soybeans, and or corn after wheat?
Um, I would say probably a lot of the studies out there um, are probably more related to going to corn after wheat. Um, I don't think typically from a rotation standpoint, you see a lot of studies that have dry beans in them or soybeans after wheat. But basically, a lot of the things that we see, we're starting to see where cover crops are improving soil health. And when you improve soil health, you get better functionality of your nutrient cycling. We're seeing increased resiliency in a lot of cases over a long enough period of time. You're seeing increase in yield coming from cover crops. So there is information out there, probably not as specific as the work with radish and sugar beets, which a lot of that has to do with sugar beet cyst nematode.
Right. Thank you. And along the same vein, can we make our own mixtures, or do we have to buy the mixtures? And that's coming from Rachel.
Yeah, you really have the option. There's a lot of mixtures out there available that are pre-made. You can create your own mixture and have it mixed by your local seed company. They can mix it for you, or you can mix it yourself. Creating your own mix is a little bit tricky. Do some research on it before you do it. You have to be careful of things like seed size, seed densities. When you're creating a mix, you really want to go back to the single species seeding rates and do it in proportion to those. Don't just say, okay, I want, half oats and half oilseed radish, so I'm going to weigh out the same pounds of each, because that's going to give you a whole lot of oilseed radish. So make sure you go back. If you're going to create your own mix, go back and do some research on it, and definitely take into account the single species seeding rate as you attempt to do that.
Okay. The next question is for Jeff. Bruce is asking, how important is northwest airflow for providing rainfall going into July and August? Or maybe a better way to ask that question is, how likely is it that we may be able to tap into Gulf moisture in a week or two out through August?
Interesting question. But in terms of our climatology, it turns out for us, northwest flow, it is a key piece of the puzzle. And in general, it's sort of a little bit of confusion. But if we have northwest flow a lot, typically we have drier air, and we don't have the inflow, the water vapor from the south, which is typically what's needed. The key is can we have periods, occasional periods, where we do get a day or two of flow up into the upper Midwest from the south in advance of one of these cold fronts, because with northwest flow, we typically see a lot of frontal boundaries, and those frontal boundaries are the key catalyst in terms of setting off the precipitation. So there's definitely a correlation there. The real key is, and it has to do with ridging upstream over the middle and the western part of the country. That's another factor. But the frontal boundaries that come with northwest flow are a key piece of that, getting precipitation. So what it matters is how often do we get the return flow in between the air masses, which is similar to what we've seen here, except over a whole week worth in the last week. So that's a real short answer. It is an important part, and it seems counterintuitive, but it is. Those frontal boundaries are very, very important for the summer, the late summer especially.
So sticking with weather, Leon has a question about the reliability of the forecast. His question is, we work to make dry hay. Seems like the NOAA forecast recently has shown lower than normal accuracy. Should we expect the forecast to be more reliable?
That's a tough one, and I actually have. It's been a tough couple of weeks for the meteorologist. Now, I don't have scores to know whether or not it's been less accurate, but one of the things that I watch particularly are those probabilities of precipitation, which essentially tells you, are you going to get measurable precip in your area or not? And I think they may have been a little bit high even with all the heavy rain. They may be over forecast a bit, but the summertime is particularly difficult for this to, especially with scattered thunderstorms, to predict who gets rain and who doesn't. I won't say it's virtually impossible, but it's really tough to do with much accuracy into the future. So they're up against a tough challenge. But that said, with this type of precipitation pattern, with scattered convection, mainly during the afternoon and evening, it is really, that's the most difficult thing, one of the most difficult things the meteorologist has to do. So if it has dropped off, that's the primary reason why you need to have these weather systems like frontal boundaries to give you more confidence about, rather than just air mass. We saw over the last week, again, mostly just air mass type of characteristics where there was not a clear focusing mechanism to concentrate convection almost on a daily basis. But I can, having to try to harvest forage over the last week, it was virtually impossible, and really tough call. I guess we can say it certainly looks better here. If there's still some out there to go, this is going to be a great opportunity here over most of the next week to do that.
Great, thank you. And Dean, a quick question for you on crimson clover. And it's coming from Kevin. He lives in the Standish, Pinconning area, and he's asking about does crimson clover winter kill? His did not.
Okay, so crimson clover can be variable as far as whether it winter kills or not. And from what I've learned checking into it, particularly with a lot of the clovers, it really depends on the growth stage that the clover is at when you get to that first frost. Typically, you want to get to at least a 4 or 6 leaf stage on crimson clover, and then it will probably survive the winter. If you're not at that stage, there's a good chance you're going to lose it. And if you have different variability within the field, you probably have some that makes it and some that doesn't. Now, I think when you put crimson clover into a mix, you increase the odds that it will survive the winter, because the other cover crops in the mix are kind of like a nurse crop. It gives you some protection from the cold, and so it's not out there all by itself and being exposed. So particularly in a mix, I think there's probably a good chance that crimson clover will survive. If you plant crimson clover after wheat in a timely fashion and it gets up growing well, I would expect it to survive the winter.
Okay. Thank you. Just a couple quick comments while Bruce is going to share a little bit on some slides that he's put together he'd like to share with everybody. But check in your chat box. Dennis is putting some information on wheat and some of the risk index, and Dr. DeFonso has some information about corn rootworm, western bean, earworms, and corn borer traps out at KBS. So if you want to put that out, Bruce, if you want to share your screen, and then Dr. Silvers also has some information out there on other issues that you might find, fungal issues. Thank you.
A couple things this morning I wanted to talk about. Where we see the worst damage is kind of the area where we've had the most had the longest duration of rainfall events down here. We do have quite a bit of damage in areas with the dark red at the very least, and the purple that you see on the screen, which would denote areas above 8 inches of rainfall. This is the 14-day out precipitation, so we go back 14 days, middle part of June on. And so we had some areas that had, these are the last 14, but if you go to the 30-day, you can see that we have quite a few areas that have had repeated rains, and that has really caused a bit of challenges here and there. This is a picture of kind of a mixed soil type in northern Van Buren County that I took yesterday. Certainly we've got some pockets there where we've had flood damage, and water is ponded in those areas. And there's a lot of fields that have varying degrees of this type of damage out there. But we're also seeing some larger fields, flatter fields, more production-oriented fields that have damage from sustained standing water on top of that too. So the big concern going forward is kind of two in my mind, is that one, that we've had enough standing water and enough warm temperatures, not hot, but warm, that we could have had denitrification losses on some of these heavier soils, especially where we've had these repeated rainfalls. And then on the lighter soils, certainly we've had enough rainfall to potentially have lost some nitrogen through leaching too. So nitrogen going on corn is probably going to be of concern, and certainly a lot of places where it's pink and red, it's too wet to even walk in those fields, let alone get out and try to actually fix any of that. But as we move forward with drier conditions, I think it's keeping an eye on those plants, seeing how they recover, and having a strategy to go back and maybe put a little additional nitrogen if there's a good enough stand, or if the plants are healthy enough to warrant doing that. Probably will be important. We have seen a couple of, certainly the corn that was planted earlier, and we had dry conditions this spring to allow that, a lot of early planting to occur. The root systems were bigger and more robust, and they've had a little better chance to withstand than some of this standing water, and seem to be doing better. The later planted fields are the ones that, of course, have been kind of hit the worst in that process. And so those are the ones that we're seeing the biggest damage on. But you take a look at a field like this, and it's only looking at a small swath of it, but it's probably 80% in trouble. So I think that's a big issue. The other thing, I guess, it's just an age-old challenge here, is where we've done tillage, especially on some of these later planted fields where we use a lot of tillage to be able to get things kind of put into place. We have just tremendous amounts of standing water. We did have tremendous amounts of standing water during these rainfall events. Lots of these shots of water came in pretty heavy downpour situation with an inch or less, but created tons of standing water and tons of potential erosion in there from just the sheer intensity of that rainfall and precipitation in that process. And so the no tills or the low tills or minimum till type situations, we've kind of looked at a few of those that did one-on-one comparison, and if you look, there's hardly any standing water. These are adjacent fields down in southern Van Buren County, and just really had a lot of potential to take in that water and avoid damage or long-term damage in there as well. So tillage does matter in that process, and I just think if we continue to go forward with these extreme events, we still need to keep that in mind as we're looking to prevent damage. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, Christina, but I do think we have some issues going forward.
All right, thank you, Bruce. With that, do any of our specialists, Dennis, Chris, Marty, do you have anything you want to add to the comments?
Marty, you've got a lot of comments out there. Would you like to share a little bit about what you're seeing?
Sure. I mean, I think the big thing, we're getting a lot of questions about black sooty mold on wheat. So this is saprophytic fungi that are growing on those wheat heads now. If there's anything that killed the wheat prematurely, like diseases, root rots, or the drought, then that's going to definitely make that worse. Typically, it's not really going to be much of an issue, but there's a chance for black point on the grain, which will affect grain quality. And then other fungal diseases, so the white mold spore caster risk was high. It's starting to drop again now. So any fields that were flowering, and had a history of white mold may benefit from a fungicide application. And then tar spot was detected in northern Illinois, not in Michigan yet, but again, all that wet weather, like Jeff said, exactly the same for sugar beet. you know, it's going to be an issue in these other crops too. So that's what I've got.
Thank you. Dennis or Chris, you have anything?
This is Chris here. Just we have a lot of traps out now. I'm trapping. I know Monica Jean is trapping. Eric down in the Southwest. So we've got a bunch of traps out. They're all that data will be free at the Great Lakes and Maritimes Pest Monitoring Network, and that'll show Michigan plus a number of other mostly provinces, but maybe some other states too. So I don't have anything yet in the traps. This today will be the first day for my Western bean 7-day check, but I know others have traps out too.
I've been zero the last 2 weeks.
Okay, good. We've got our zeros. I know Phil put his out, and so we'll have, I don't know, a bunch of different sites will at least, you know, give us some early monitoring of Western bean flight.
I guess with that, Phil, I don't think I have anything else. There's no more questions. Dennis says he's got nothing further to report. So thank you
Sounds
for coming this week. Okay. See you next week.